Buenos días, señoras y señores. Good morning. Welcome and thank you for joining this webinar on IEA's Energy Efficiency Market Report for 2016, which covers global market trends and prospects. This webinar is based on a publication produced by the International Energy Agency that came out in October with the same name and is available for free on our website in English. The webinar is organized by the International Energy Agency with the kind support of Secretaría de Energía. My name is David Morgado. I'll be moderating the webinar, and I'm joined by my colleague Tyler Bryan from the IEA's Energy Efficiency Division and the manager of IEA's Energy Efficiency Market Reports, and he'll be carrying out this presentation. So you can see us there. That's the team for the webinar today. And I'll go through the agenda for today. So basically we have an introduction on how the webinar works, and then welcome remarks by Santiago Crujeras, Director General of Efficiency and Sustainable Energy at CENER. And then we'll have Tyler present some of the main highlights of the Energy Efficiency Market Report, looking at the impact of energy efficiency policy on energy security and other areas. And then we'll have a look at energy efficiency and prices. And finally, we'll finalize with some of the key messages of the report. And in the end, we'll have a Q&A. So we'd really like to hear from you and like to include your voice in the conversation. So please ask questions and share comments so that we can discuss these at the end of the webinar. To do so, before we start the webinar, we'd like to go through the setup of the webinar and let you know how you can participate in today's session. The slide shows you an example of the attendee interface. You should be seeing something that looks like this on your computer. If you have joined today's webinar listening through your computer speakers by default, this means if you usually can hear music on your computer, you'll be able to hear the presentation. If you'd like to call in using the telephone, just locate your audio pane and select Use Telephone. The dial-in information and access code will then be displayed. So the number and access code are indicated on this slide. You also have the ability to ask questions using your question pane. So just simply type in your question, either in English or Spanish, and click Send. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have time for discussion and go through the questions you submitted during the presentation. Please note that we'll be recording the webinar, and we'll make the link available for those who have missed the webinar, as well as if you want to share it with your colleagues or would like to go over it again. We'll also share a PDF of the presentation with you. So unless there's any questions at this time, if not, we'll proceed with introduction speech by Santiago Crujeras, Director General of Efficiency and Sustainable Energy at CENER. So just give me a second to put him online now. Santiago, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. We can hear you.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, David. Good morning, Tyler. Muy buenos días a todos. En nombre de la Secretaría de Energía, una vez más me da mucho gusto darles la más cordial bienvenida a este webinar que forma parte de la serie de webinars que hemos organizado la Secretaría de Energía de México y la Agencia Internacional de Energía. Esto ha pasado a convertirse en una práctica ya muy importante que ha trascendido fronteras y que bueno, pues nos da mucho gusto que nos encontremos cada vez más personas en estos webinars, pudiendo conocer más sobre los desarrollos y documentos que elabora la Agencia Internacional de Energía en coordinación también con los demás países participantes, y aún más en esta ruta que ha establecido México para formar parte de la Agencia Internacional de Energía. El seminario que nos une esta mañana está enfocado al reporte del mercado de eficiencia energética 2016. Es un reporte muy relevante en el cual en la versión anterior México ocupó un lugar muy importante en el diseño y desarrollo de este reporte, y ahora, bueno, pues conoceremos los avances con respecto a la eficiencia energética y su mercado en el mundo. Como destacará seguramente Tyler en unos minutos, la intensidad energética global mejoró a lo largo del 2015, pero pues esto es algo que se tiene que mejorar aún más. Sin duda, los países que se consideran economías emergentes han intensificado la aceleración de la intensidad, y esto pues es algo que nos obliga a tomar acciones. Sin embargo, en el resto del mundo la intensidad energética ha disminuido, y esto pues es muy importante. Así que el caso que nos maneja este documento con respecto al progreso de China es también muy importante, y creo que ahora que la agencia nos lo comente más a detalle, pues podremos ver qué podemos hacer nosotros también desde el punto de vista de política pública. Y también sé que, por ejemplo, nos están acompañando diversos actores de la industria, quienes tienen también mucho interés en la eficiencia energética, y que sin duda, bueno, pues son actores muy importantes y relevantes en el caso de México, y con mucha influencia en el resto del mundo. No quiero dejar de comentar, como ustedes saben, que en el marco de la reforma energética, la ley de transición ha establecido una estrategia, como ya lo habíamos comentado en ocasiones anteriores, y esta estrategia por primera vez en México está estableciendo metas de corto, mediano y largo plazo en la eficiencia energética. Así que estimamos que en los próximos años estaremos disminuyendo nuestra intensidad energética en un 42%. Esto es un compromiso muy grande que ha establecido México, en promedio 1.9% anual, y es una meta que por primera vez tenemos ya en nuestro país. Sin más, quiero agradecer otra vez a la Agencia Internacional de Energía, al director ejecutivo Fatih Birol, quien además estuvo en México aquí hace un par de semanas para presentar el Mexico's Energy Outlook, que es una publicación que es muy importante para el país, sobre todo en el marco de esta reforma energética, y que contamos con el privilegio de tener aquí al director ejecutivo presentándola personalmente. Muchas gracias por la oportunidad, y deseo que este seminario sea en beneficio de todos y cada uno de los más de 160 participantes que se encuentran conectados en este momento. Muchísimas gracias y buena mañana.
Thank you, Santiago, very much for all your support in these webinars that we've been organizing now for almost 2 years, and we've had, in total of those 12 webinars that we've organized, we've had 1,200 people attending, and so I'd like to thank all the attendees here as well for their support and for attending our webinars, and we hope you find this one particularly interesting. As Santiago mentioned, the IEA launched the World Energy Outlook special report on Mexico, and I'm hoping that the next webinar we'll organize will be on that report with a special focus on energy efficiency. Without further ado, I'll pass on to my colleague Tyler to present on the Energy Efficiency Market Report.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you for being on the call, entertaining me on today of all days. So that is very much appreciated. And I'm sorry that I can't do this in Spanish. I wish I could, but it's probably better for all of us that I deliver this in English. But I'll try to. I have support here with David, and we'll be able to field questions in English and Spanish. So just to quickly get you started, I am the project manager of the Energy Efficiency Market Report here at the IEA, and the Efficiency Market Report 2016 is the 4th annual Efficiency Market Report that the IEA has released. And this is among 4 other efficiency market reports, so the gas, coal, oil, and renewable market reports. This is the newest market report. And the role of the energy efficiency market report is really to put a face on energy efficiency and to make it as important and to bring its stock forward as important as any of the other fuels. And what I hope to talk to you today about is just how important efficiency has been in countries in the IEA, emerging countries, and a country like Mexico, and to discuss how important it will need to be moving forward. So here is a cover of the report. The first thing I will mention is that unlike some of the other market reports, it is free to download. So please look at our website there at the bottom. That is a microsite of the report. And what that means is you can read the key findings of the report on your cell phone, on your mobile phone. That is a mobile-enabled website that discusses all the key findings, and you can download the main report there. What we try to do is we try to do a tracking of energy efficiency and its core indicators around the world. We look at the drivers of the energy efficiency market this year, especially focusing on policies. We looked at the impact of changing energy prices. So 2015 was obviously an important year in global energy commodity markets, what with the decline in headline crude oil prices. We are the only agency that does a robust worldwide estimate and quantification of energy efficiency investment. And we also look at key countries, such as on the cover there of the report. That is no coincidence. We have a detailed focus on China this year that we'll get into. So just to give you some context for the report, these are some of the major findings that we found. So critically to a country like Mexico that has energy resources, but also it has a very large and abundant energy efficiency resource as well. And efficiency is unlike other energy commodity resources. All countries contain an efficiency resource, have the potential to improve energy efficiency, and that has real impacts on reducing energy demand and on impacting commodity markets. Our main finding is that globally, energy efficiency gains appear to be accelerating in 2015, and they jumped again from 2013-14 to 2014-2015. That is a sign of good news. And that leads us to believe that there is something else going on propelling these efficiency gains, because these efficiency gains stepped up again amid low energy prices. In 2015, the energy efficiency investment grew 6%. So that, again, provides us with some evidence that some other factor besides energy prices are propelling efficiency investment. And this investment was delivered and driven by investment in the building sector. The savings from energy efficiency are now at a scale that they are influencing global energy markets. And it is becoming a central component of our response to climate change and climate change mitigation. So while efficiency are impacting markets right now, its role will only intensify into the future. And I was alluding to this through my previous points, but it appears that government policies are the key driver of efficiency gains. They have been in 2015, and they have been over the past 15 years. And we'll get into some of those findings in this webinar. So our headline indicator, global energy intensity, showed positive gains again in 2015. And in fact, the intensity gain in 2015 was 3 times larger than the average annual intensity gain from 2003 to 2013. So what we've witnessed is, yes, there has been a step change in the global energy efficiency indicator. It improved over 1.5% in 2014. This is a sign of good news, but of course, we need to step that up again. So in order to achieve our 2-degree goal, as outlined in the Paris Agreement, we need to improve efficiency again from 1.8%, we need to improve it by another third to 2.6%. Importantly, that step up needs to come immediately. So in 2016, and it needs to endure out to 2030. What I mean to say is, we don't hit 2.6% by 2030. We need to elevate efficiency gains to 2.6% starting right now and maintain that percentage improvement for each year between now and 2030. That is the scale of the challenge in front of us. The good thing is that actually this will have great benefits as well. So using the IEA's detailed energy efficiency indicators database, we can construct a scenario by which we can estimate what the impact of energy efficiency has been in IEA countries. This blue bar here shows what energy demand would have been had we not improved energy efficiency above 2000 levels. To make this a bit more simple to understand, imagine that we're living in a world that's different from today, but our economy, our population have grown at the exact same rate, only the efficiency of all the technologies that we use has not improved since the year 2000. That means to say we are still watching TVs on old cathode ray tubes. We don't have nice LCD TVs. We're still driving around old Volkswagen Bugs and all of that. We are listening to our old transistor radios, but it's the current day today. So that's to say the efficiency of our technologies has not improved, but everything else has changed as they observed. And what we show here is that energy demand in that scenario would be about 12% higher than 2000 levels. Energy demand would have been growing by about 1% a year since the financial crisis. And in 2015, energy demand would have surpassed the 2007 absolute peak in demand for IEA countries. So that's a world without energy efficiency. Now, thankfully, actually, there's the real world. That is what has actually happened. That is total final consumption in IEA countries between 2000 and 2015. And critically, in fact, total final consumption in 2015 is slightly below 2000 levels, even though our economy has grown by about 25% over that time period. It looks like 2007 will be the absolute peak for IEA and OECD countries, and energy demand has not grown essentially since 2013. I want to point you to that difference at the very end of the chart. In the year 2015, the difference between the blue line and the green line is 450 million tons of oil equivalent. How much energy is that? Well, that is approximately the primary energy demand of Japan, which is the second largest energy consumer in the IEA. So essentially, the role of efficiency is that it's removing a Japan from the global energy system. We already have one Japan, we don't need to. If you save that much energy, you also save that much fuel use. So taking those energy savings, we can estimate at the IEA what the corresponding greenhouse gas emission savings have been. And as you see there, between the IEAs and China, between the IEA countries, and China, 3 billion tons of CO2 emissions have been avoided in 2015. The cumulative avoided emissions is 16 billion tons over the time frame of 2000 to 2015. That's about 4% of the remaining global carbon budget to stay within 1.5 degrees. Importantly, that leads us to believe that efficiency policies, and especially efficiency policy in China, has been the most important action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions globally. In the report this year, this is analysis from the World Energy Outlook, but in the report this year, we look at what the role that the Paris Agreement will have on energy efficiency investment. Here's the IEA's forward-looking scenario for the Paris Agreement. And there's one thing I want to point your attention to is that even though the Paris Agreement was a major success and over 180 countries have signed on, you may notice that that line actually is not declining still. It is continuing to grow. That is total greenhouse gas emissions, even if all countries comply with the Paris Agreement. The IEA developed the bridge scenario, which is not a scenario that gets us to 2 degrees, but it's a scenario that gets us on track to achieve 2 degrees after 2030. Importantly, it peaks emissions by 2020 and uses the lowest cost measures that we can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And what are those low cost measures? Well, undoubtedly they are energy efficiency. Energy efficiency makes up 50% of the difference in greenhouse gas emissions between those two lines. It is by far the most important action that we can take to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to comply with the 2 degree scenario. Drilling in a bit deeper, around the world, efficiency matters for all regions. In the United States and Latin America, it accounts for over a third, 44% in fact, of the greenhouse gas emissions between now and 2030. In a place like the European Union and China, it's even larger, at over 3/4 of the greenhouse gas emissions reductions come from energy efficiency. But we aren't improving energy efficiency just to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, the greenhouse gas emissions reductions can often be considered as incidental of the other benefits that we use energy efficiency for. So at the IEA, we used our detailed energy prices and taxes database to estimate how many energy expenditure savings, energy efficiency was responsible for. So in 2015, energy efficiency was avoiding over $540 billion of expenditure on energy for households and businesses. Between 2000 and 2015, the cumulative savings were $5.7 trillion. This is only in IEA countries, but as you can see, it's a huge component to reducing energy bills for consumers. We estimate that in IEA countries, energy efficiency was leading to about $600 per capita savings each year by 2015. And of course, if you're saving all that energy, you're also saving imports. So here we show what the avoided imports are from these efficiency improvements. For all IEA countries, it was around $54 billion. The largest avoided imports were in the European Union, Japan, Korea. Looking at China now. We did our first decomposition analysis, so that's our specific energy efficiency focus analysis with China in partnership with the Energy Research Institute of China. And we show that because of the size of China's economy and the efficiency potential there, the savings in China are truly immense. So just to walk you through this chart, this shows what our energy savings were of improving energy efficiency since 2000. Now you probably might be a bit confused looking at this, saying, wait a second, what are negative energy savings by 2005 there? Well, in fact, China's energy efficiency worsened between 2000 and 2005. China needed an extra 120 million tons of oil equivalent by 2005 just to compensate for its worsening efficiency. This was led by investment-heavy, export-led development in heavy industry, and with very little framework policies to improve energy efficiency in China. 120 million tons of oil equivalent is approximately the energy consumption of Italy. So just worsening efficiency was adding an Italy to the global energy mix. However, Chinese policymakers got real. And in 2006, with the implementation of the 11th five-year plan, they put in the first economy-wide or industry-wide efficiency targets and spent money to improve efficiency in the building sector and in the commercial building sector as well. Since then, efficiency improvements over 2000 levels have saved about 330 million tons of oil equivalent in China. That's approximately the energy consumption of Germany, and has avoided about 350 million tons of coal consumption in 2014. That sounds like a lot. So how much is 350 million tons of coal consumption? Well, that's approximately 30% of the volume of the total coal traded around the world. So if you want to talk about what impact energy efficiency is having on global commodity markets, imagine what the coal market would look like if there was 30% more coal traded around the world. And there you have a potential signifier of the role of energy efficiency. Also interestingly is that those green dots are China's renewable energy supply. And as you can see there, by 2014, China's aggressive efficiency policies were generating savings that were on the order or the same size as China's renewable energy supply. And China has the world's largest renewable energy supply. The growth in savings, in fact, were 3 times larger than the growth in renewable energy supply since 2000. That means that renewable energy and energy efficiency are China's twin clean fuels. How does China compare to other developed and developing economies? Well, this chart may appear a bit confusing, but let me just walk you through it. As you can see on the right there, that is China, the red. China is an incredibly energy-intensive economy. It was, in 2000, it was 65% more energy-intensive than OECD countries. And even with all of those spectacular energy efficiency savings, it is still 50% more intensive than OECD countries on average today. So while a lot of progress has been made in China, there is still a lot of progress yet to be made. You can see Mexico there, which is on the far left. So at a TFC, the energy intensity of final energy consumption in Mexico is the best amongst the countries that we evaluated, better than China, Indonesia, Brazil, India. But the energy intensity improvement is middle of the road. And in fact, by 2013, energy efficiency, appeared to be reverting a bit. So we can talk a little bit about why that may be later on. I'll give you a hint. It may have something to do with policy. So this year, for the first time, we tried to quantify the impact that energy efficiency policies, specifically mandatory minimum energy performance standards and mandatory energy savings targets, were having on total energy demand. What we show here is what percentage of global energy consumption and energy consumption by end use was being covered by mandatory standards. At the very bottom, you see that world total final energy consumption, 11% was covered by energy efficiency standards in the year 2000. What we did here is we said, how much of the lighting, the electric motors, the vehicles, the space heating equipment was being influenced by energy efficiency standards in the year 2000? And it turns out 11% of global energy use. Jump forward to 2015, and that share of global energy use has jumped from 11 to 30% worldwide. You can see in some end uses, the increase has been dramatic, such as for lighting, where less than 5% of lighting energy consumption was subject to any light standard. Now over 60% is subject to lighting standards. What I will point you to is that some sectors appear to be doing better than others. So light-duty vehicles, basically the consumer domestic sectors, vehicles, space heating appliances, basically residential buildings are doing well, and that the industrial and commercial sectors could be doing better. So for heavy-duty vehicles and electric motors used in industry, we need more standards and we need to improve. We did this policy coverage for countries around the world. And as you can see there, there's a great divergence between countries. The United States has the most energy covered in its transport sector because they have the longest history of using vehicle efficiency standards than any other country in the world. Conversely, China has the most energy covered in the industrial sector. That is because in one fell swoop, in the 11th and 12th five-year plans, they covered 85% of Chinese energy consumption with mandatory savings targets for industry. You're probably looking at Mexico there. One area for Mexico to improve is in the transport sector, where over half of its final energy consumption is taken up by transport, and yet still a very small section of transport energy use is being covered by standards. It isn't just the expansion of policy that matters, it's also the tightening of policy or the strengthening of mandatory policies as well. This year we introduced for the first time our Efficiency Policy Progress Index. This index very simply accounts for the growth in standards that I just showed you and the improvement in the strength of standards. So between 2005 and 2015, we looked at how for the largest countries around the world, how they have improved the performance of their standards. Air conditioning, which had very few standards prior to 2005, saw the largest jump, 28% improvement in coverage and stringency. And again, getting back to my previous point, it's in the commercial end uses that we need to see greater performance improvements, such as for heavy-duty vehicles and electric motors. But still, the expansion of the EPI is still quite modest. So at the world level, weighting for total final consumption, the Policy Performance Index only improved by 7%. That means to say that standards can still deliver a lot. Standards have a lot of potential to save further energy. This chart, I can just walk you through it, asks, what if the global stock of energy-using equipment was subject to or complied with average and best-in-class standards? So looking at the leftmost column, space cooling, that means basically air conditioners. We asked ourselves using the IEA's Energy Technology Perspectives model, what if every air conditioner in the world in 2015 complied with average level standards? How much energy consumption would we save? Well, we would save 30% of all energy consumption that went to space cooling. If we went to the best-in-class standards, so in this case it would be Japanese standards for air conditioning, those energy savings would jump to approximately 45% of the global energy that we consume to cool our buildings would have been reduced. In total, amongst all these end uses, if we just moved to average level standards, we would have saved 14% of global residential energy consumption. We like to say that standards are another energy resource, only instead of being buried underground, they're at the fingertips of policymakers. But it isn't just standards. Markets matter as well, and the cost of technologies matters greatly. And this is why we need research and development policies to bring the cost of efficiency down still. This chart shows what the price of an LED bulb was in the United States and India. And you can see there in the United States, the price has dropped by about 90% since 2010, excuse me. What has the impact been for energy savings? Well, just LED bulbs and other efficient lighting were saving around 110 terawatt hours of electricity consumption in 2015. What is 110 terawatt hours? That is approximately half of the global growth in electricity consumption in 2015 as well. So without LED bulbs, the growth in electricity consumption would have been 1/3 higher. Goes to show that small technologies such as a little light bulb can have a big impact at the global scale. It would be remiss to have a market report this year and not talk about energy efficiency and the role of energy prices. So, the headline price of crude between summer 2014 and the end of 2015 dropped by about 60%. That will obviously affect the payback of various energy efficient goods, and we decided to delve into that. The first thing to note, though, is that while the headline price of crude dropped 60%, the retail price of gasoline did not drop nearly as much in as many countries. So in the United States, crude prices dropped 60%, but the retail price of gasoline dropped 38%. In a place like Germany, the decline in retail gasoline prices was only about 12%. So first off, government tax policy or removing subsidies on oil products and gasoline is the first option that policymakers have to ensure that efficiency investment is not impacted by declining prices. But still, the prices have declined and we have noticed impacts in the market. So this shows the sales of light-duty trucks in the United States, where it appears that the impact of falling prices is the most acute. So light-duty truck sales reached an all-time high in the United States in 2015 at around 9 million vehicles. Similarly, truck sales in China were also at all-time highs. Light-duty trucks are less efficient than smaller passenger vehicles. If everything else remains the same, the growth in the sales of light-duty trucks will see a worsening of the efficiency of your total new vehicle stock. But, however, corporate average fuel economy standards in the United States ensured that efficiency gains still were achieved in 2015, albeit slower. So the average rate of efficiency improvement between 2010 and 2013 of new vehicles was around 1.8% per year. However, in 2014 and 2015, that improvement rate dropped to 1%. Still, the efficiency of light-duty trucks is around 9% more efficient in 2015 than it was in 2010. It goes to show that standards provide an important backstop in case of market volatility for energy efficiency. Finally, we looked at the market for energy efficiency. How much investment is going into the efficiency space? And this year, we decided that we estimated that it was $221 billion worldwide. Over half of the investment is in the building sector. The building sector investment grew by 9% in 2015. And that is actually spurred by just strong construction in that sector in that year. Would you mind going back? There we go. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. The other sectors, transport and industry, made up the balance. Interestingly, we found that, in fact, energy efficiency investment in transport appears to be very cheap. So the efficiency premium that you need to pay to get a more efficient vehicle in many vehicle classes in many countries appears to be very small. And the cost benefit, therefore, of efficiency is large. Finally, we looked at the pure market for energy efficiency, and this is energy service companies or the marketplace for energy efficiency services. We found that the total size of ESCO revenues, these are energy service companies, was $24 billion in 2015, and the market is dominated by China. It goes to show again how important government policy is to creating a marketplace for energy efficiency. The targets and framework policies in China saw the growth of the Chinese ESCO market at 7% per year over the previous 10 years. The United States, meanwhile, doubled its ESCO market over the past 10 years, and the European Union and other countries make up the balance. Importantly, another key finding was that the mergers and acquisitions for these companies was growing over the previous 10 years, and the types of companies that were acquiring ESCOs was diversifying, indicating that there's green shoots for this market, that there appears to be signs for further growth of the ESCO market. So there you have it. That's most of our key findings in a nutshell. I'll just run through again what our key messages were of the report. That global energy intensity improved, but we need more. More is required, and critically, it's developing countries outside of the IEA that will drive that global intensity improvement between now and 2030 if we are to achieve our climate goals. While 30% of global energy consumption is covered by standards, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that still 70% of global energy use is not covered by standards. Energy efficiency is a central component of any suite of actions to meet our greenhouse gas emissions targets. And that, unlike other energy resources, energy efficiency can be leveraged and strengthened by interaction and coordination between countries. And the IEA will continue to lead this analysis and knowledge exchange between our partner countries such as Mexico and the rest of the world. So with that, thank you very much, and I pass it over to David.
Thank you very much, Tyler, for a very interesting presentation. We now have the Q&A discussion, and we've got about 15 minutes, I'd say, for Q&A. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we'd really like to hear from you, the attendees, and like to include your voice in the conversation. So please ask questions and share comments through the question pane. So you can see that usually on the right of your screen. So you can type in your question either in English or Spanish and click send, and we'll start responding to them now. I've noticed that we already have 2 questions, and then one question is related to the Paris Agreement. So what is, in your view, the impact of the Paris Agreement on the energy efficiency market?
So we show that there's definitely going to be an impact from the Paris Agreement on efficiency investment. There's a couple indicators to note here. So on the positive side, over 85% of the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions in the Paris Agreement, mention energy efficiency in some way. Mexico's does as well. But on the negative note, only 1/3 of the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, have any specific energy efficiency target or specific energy efficiency policies associated with its goals. So we know that energy efficiency is the cheapest, most lowest cost action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We show in our scenarios that energy demand globally is down about 1.6% between the Paris Agreement scenario and current policies. And we show that the concentration of action is highest in the building sector in energy efficiency between now and 2020. So if you were an investor, or if you wanted to get interested in energy efficiency, then the Paris Agreement is providing signals that building efficiency investment is poised to grow.
Thanks, Tyler. We have another question. Why did global intensity improvements increase markedly in 2015? So can you explain a bit about that?
The global intensity improvement, you can probably imagine, was impacted by one country in particular, and that is China. China in 2014 improved its energy intensity by 5.6%. Without China in the world and China's energy intensity improvement, the global intensity improvement would have been 1/3 lower. Now, importantly, based on our analysis, this is a result primarily of energy efficiency in China. This goes up to 2014. So yes, in 2015, there does appear to be some structural changes, a move away from heavy industry. But between 2000 and 2014, we did not show large structural change in China. This is mostly led by Chinese policy. The other important role are OECD countries, such as Mexico and others. Primary energy demand in OECD countries in 2015 was essentially flat, and GDP did grow by another 2%. So there's a lot of congratulations to spread around, but I would say particularly progress in OECD countries and China is what saw the global intensity improvement step up again this year.
Thanks, Tyler. There's another question here just to try and maybe I'll put that on the screen to try to understand a bit more how the PPI is calculated, and so I'm just going to try to.
That's a common question. So my first response is to say you should download the report where we discuss the methodology in greater detail. But essentially, it is a simple calculation. Well, on the surface, it's simple. So we look at the expansion of coverage for each of these end uses or each country. And so for air conditioners, if in, say, country X, let's call it Mexico, for example, if Mexico had no efficiency standards on its air conditioner, but then implemented standards in 2005, that was covering 10% of air conditioner energy consumption by 2015, then that means we would multiply 10% by how much more stringent the standards are than the average air conditioner. So if Mexico put on a standard that made air conditioners 25% more efficient, we would take 10%, multiply it by 25%, and then weight that by the amount of air conditioner energy consumption. So divide it by the total amount of air conditioner energy consumption to compare it to the other sources. So that's essentially how we do that for the EPI.
Thanks, Tyler. The other one, the question we have is looking particularly, it relates to a question we had earlier, but looking at what's the contribution of industry and looking at industry energy intensity and how that can contribute to the 2-degree scenario. I don't know if we looked at that, put it in the report.
We don't look at that in the report, but it just so happens I know about this. And we have a colleague in the room as well who may be able to help out. But efficiency in industry in our 2-degree scenario, in the energy technology perspective's 2-degree scenario, is the largest action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions between now and 2050. So in many ways, improving the efficiency of industry is the most important thing that we have to do. How we do that is a very good question. There's the China case that says mandatory energy targets for all of industry, but not every country, in fact, no other country is like China in many respects where they have the opportunity to do something like that. So it will take standards, it will take market instruments. So as I told you, in the ESCO industry, it's enabling ESCOs and strengthening their business models. There's a reason why the ESCO industry, the ESCO market is dominated by China. It's because China used ESCOs to improve industrial energy efficiency to achieve its targets. So it's strengthening the business case, it's improving standards, it's removing energy subsidies, pricing carbon, it's everything but the kitchen sink for industry.
Thanks, Tyler. There's another question here on looking at what contribution local governments can give to energy efficiency, and I think for that question I'd start focusing a bit on the Mexico case, and of course the enforcement and adoption of building energy codes is something that local governments can do in Mexico that will have a significant contribution to reducing the energy consumption of buildings, and that's been quite successful in some places like Mexicali, where they have implemented, particularly in terms of insulation of buildings, and achieved significant savings. So I'd say, particularly for Mexico and looking at what local governments can do, that's an important point. Of course, also working with the small and medium enterprises and local industry and trying to get them to look at, see if they're complying as much as possible with the best available technologies or best technology, and trying to support them there, I think are important. But in terms of solely what local governments can do, I'd say building adoption and enforcement of building energy codes is very important.
And also critically, transport energy. So most energy consumption in transport takes place in cities, and local governments are incredibly leveraged on decisions that incentivize different types of transit, different types of patterns and behaviors of vehicle and transport use. I like to think of local governments as the key action ministries of the federal government, for example. They enable changes that the federal government signs up to. So, for example, in the Paris Agreement, it'll be the Mexican federal government, the national government that signs the NDC, and it'll be local governments that will help them achieve those targets. So local governments, you need all hands on deck, and local governments definitely need to look to opportunities to improve both the efficiency of their transport systems and also to enacting and enforcing its building regulations.
Thanks, Tyler. We've got a very interesting one on the transport side. So somebody is arguing that, of course, these impact on prices will take longer to be seen on the sales and etc. And he's asking if we're going to be keep track of what's happening there under the market report.
Yeah, we're definitely keeping track of this now. In transport, though, the oil price declines can show up very quickly in the data, which is what we saw in the United States, is that there was, the instant that oil prices started declining, we saw a worsening of efficiency in a couple key marketplaces. Vehicles are bought in the United States, it's over 15 million vehicles are bought every year. In China, it's 20 million. So there's a big space to improve efficiency quickly or not. One of the findings of analysis we had in this year's market report was that globally, the efficient vehicles bought in 2015 were saving about 160,000 barrels of oil per day, which is not a whole lot. That's about 0.1% of global energy demand, or global oil demand, excuse me, or let me say that again, of global oil production. But over their lifetimes, they will save over 1 billion barrels of oil. 1 billion barrels of oil is larger than the combined strategic petroleum reserves of the United States and the European Union. So efficient vehicles just bought in 2015 were reducing the need for another SPR, excuse me.
Thanks, Tyler. I think we've got a couple more minutes. Maybe this will be our last question. So somebody's mentioning that energy efficiency standards particularly have an effect on products that are coming into the market, so not on the existing stock. So in that aspect, what can be done? And I think, of course, there's, as Mexico has done, very successful with replacing incandescent bulbs with CFLs. So market transformation programs, but of course it can be also through tax incentives, other financial mechanisms to trigger companies to replace their existing stock and not wait till the end of the lifetime of motors, etc.
Exactly, that's going to be critical. So an electric motor can last anywhere from 15 to 25 years in a factory. It goes to show how important it is to implement standards as early as possible. Because the longer you wait, the more potential you're leaving on the table, especially for something like motors or longer-lived pieces of stock like vehicles or buildings. How we do scrappage programs, how we recall existing things, that's something we're going to need to think about more, and I wish I had answers for that, but I don't.
Yeah, there's several options available for countries, and I'm sure there's a lot of experience in Mexico with lighting, street lighting, for example, as well, building retrofit recently as well, that are good examples of how that can be done. I think we've reached the end. Unfortunately, we're not able to answer all the questions. A lot of them very interesting. A couple of them very specific to Mexico and the EXCO market. I know it hasn't really taken off in Mexico there, but CONUE, I believe, is trying to work and try to set up contract templates and a number of other measures to trigger the ESCO market there, and hopefully that will start growing soon, but a lot of other measures will need to be in place particularly in terms of financing to help them grow. I'd like to thank you for your attention and participation in today's webinar. The presentation should be available at the end of this week on the IEA's YouTube website, and we'll be sending you a link as well as the PDF. Please feel free to share with your colleagues. For us, it's been a real pleasure to conduct this webinar, which we hope you found useful. We also like to thank CENER and Anna Lepore, our IEA staff at CENER, for all their support in helping us organize these webinars. We'll continue to organize other energy efficiency webinars, and I'm hoping the next one will be on the World Energy Outlook's report on Mexico that came out last month, and hopefully we can do a webinar focusing on energy efficiency and also covering air pollution. So we'll keep you informed, and please do not hesitate to contact us if you have any questions. Thank you very much.